All right, thank you for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn interview skills. I am Mac Ingram, and I am Assistant Director in the UAB Office of Alumni Affairs. As in the case with any virtual event, please excuse any glitches. If you have any video trouble or audio issues, click the reconnect button at the top of your screen, and this will get you back into the webinar quickly. Today's session is a part of our ongoing Backpacks to Briefcase series in the Evergreen Certificate Program. This series we will have 4 events each year, 2 in the spring, 2 in the fall. These events will focus on financial planning, workplace skills, personal life, and today's topic, interview skills. Between each event, we will have opportunities for golden electives, events like lunch and learns, or networking and volunteering opportunities. To get an Evergreen certificate and lapel pin, participants must complete all 4 Evergreen events and 2 golden electives. You do not have to do these all at the same time or in the same calendar year. We invite you to jump in at any time and join us whenever you can. You can get more information about the program at alumni.uab.edu/backpacks. Today, we welcome Adam Roderick to our Backpacks to Briefcase series. Adam is the Associate Director of our Career Education in the UAB Career Center, where he works with people across campus and the community to promote a culture of career preparedness and support. Adam has been with the UAB Career Center since joining the team in 2014. In 2009, he earned his Bachelor of Science degree in psychology from the College of Arts and Sciences, and he holds a Master of Education in Clinical Counseling from the University of Montevallo. All right, so Adam, let's bring you in. Welcome, and we are so glad to have you join us again. And a quick announcement, everyone, this will be recorded, and a presentation will be available to everyone on our website on Monday. So Adam, I'm going to hand it over to you, my man.
Thank you, Mac. I appreciate that, man. Y'all always do the best introductions in the National Alumni Society. So I appreciate that, and thank you. And welcome, everybody. It's great to see everybody. For those of you who were with us last week, welcome back. It's great to see you again. And for those of you who are just now joining us, welcome. As Mac alluded to, my name is Adam Roderick. I work in the UAB Career Center, and really today want to, for those who were here with us last week, continue the conversation about securing employment and moving forward in your career. But for those of you who are joining us today, we're going to focus in specifically on interview skills. And so one of the things I want to make clear at the beginning is that if you have questions, please put those in the chat. We will have a chance at the end to address those. And I encourage you, as questions come up, to put those into the chat. I probably will take about 30 minutes for this presentation, and I want to make sure that we give enough time for you to ask the questions that are relevant and pertinent to you as well at the end. So as we go through, please feel free to do that. And for those of you who did join us last time, I do want to say this is kind of the continuation of that career equation that we talked about, right? So the resume gets the interview, and then the interview gets the offer. And so we got the resume taken care of last week. We'll talk about the interview today, and then that moves you guys forward into getting those offers and getting those careers that you are excited and moving towards. And if you weren't able to join us last week, as Mac alluded to, it was recorded. So I encourage you to go check that out on the National Alumni Society webpage to make sure that you're keeping up with everything we are discussing. But today specifically, we're going to look at 3 takeaways. Number 1, we're going to look at effectively telling your story. Number 2, we're going to work to articulate your value to employers using proven interview techniques to answer behavioral interview questions. And we're going to successfully utilize the STAR method. Okay, so we're going to walk through these 3, and I want you to hold me to these because when we get to the end, I'm going to circle back to make sure that we hit all of them. Okay, so let's rock and roll. All right, so first, before we get anywhere, we need to make sure that when we get an offer for the interview, that we are preparing for the interview, right? Like that should, I guess, go without saying, but it's something that we need to kind of begin the conversation about, something we need to make sure that we are having a conversation about to make sure that when you walk in the room, you're ready to rock and roll. And one of the reasons this is so important is because according to a Strata survey, 47% of employers said the biggest mistake that job seekers make is to come to the interview with little to no knowledge of the company they are interviewing with. So imagine walking in the room with Alabama Power and you know nothing about what Alabama Power does, or walking in an interview at UAB and knowing nothing about what UAB is or what they do. 47%. That is a huge, huge number. And I'll be honest, this is an easy win for you. And so when we prepare for the interview, one of the first things we want to make sure that we do is to explore the company. And when I say know the company, what I'm talking about is, what is their organization about? What is their mission? What is their cause? What is their purpose? Know about, what the work that they do as much as you possibly can. Know about the organizational structure. Are they local? Are they national? Are they international? Try to dig in as deep as you possibly can, because it'll help you understand how you will fit better within that company and make a pitch to be the best fit for that organization. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. But the first thing, again, is know the company. Do your research before you even walk in the room, so that you have some expertise, some background, some knowledge about the company before the interview even starts. So number one, know the company. But then the other piece of that is know yourself. There's kind of two pieces to the interview equation, right? The company and you, and how do we make those two things match? So if we know the company, that's a great start, but it's also important that we know ourselves. And when I say know yourself, that's really from the employer's perspective, right? So you want to know yourself from their point of view. So knowing yourself means understanding the knowledge that you're bringing, the past experiences, the things that, really make you stand out amongst that crowd. When you interview for these opportunities, you're probably not going to be the only person that they're interviewing. And so you want to do a really good job of articulating and accentuating and communicating your impact in the interview, as a continuation of what we talked about last week in the resume. So knowledge, experience, the skills that you're bringing to the table. And when I say skills, this is a great opportunity for you to show versus tell, right? It's one thing for you to tell a prospective employer, I'm a great communicator, or I have leadership experience, or I'm proficient in, this platform. What's much more impactful is if you can talk about a time you had to lead a team through a difficult change, or when you had to communicate difficult information to a large group of people, or deliver a presentation to a crowd of 150, 300 people, right? So if you can talk about those things and give them practical examples, that's a really great way for you to demonstrate that impact. So think about those things. When I say know yourself, kind of find those tent pole moments, right? Find those things that you want to hang your hat on, bring you into the interview, and that things that add value to the employer, right? Personal traits, goals, but there at the bottom, as I just alluded to, really all of this needs to kind of culminate in the communication of value. They want to know not only your skill sets, your experiences, your knowledge, but how those tie back into the company. So in kind of the big picture view, the interview means that they liked what they saw on your resume, right? They liked your qualifications, they liked your past experiences. So now it's the time for you to take that to the next level, right? It's now time for you to further highlight, further accentuate everything that you talked about on your resume. And two, just to kind of personify, right, yourself as an applicant. Because when you see a resume, a lot of times it's very, cold and calculated and practiced and, impact focused, as it should be. But the interview is a great opportunity for them to know you, to know your personality, your characteristics, your traits, and try to find the best fit for that company, okay? So before you do anything, make sure we prepare for the interview by knowing the company and knowing yourself. So once we do those two things, kind of the next step in effectively navigating through an interview is to effectively tell your story, all right? Humans are narrative creatures. We appreciate a story. We appreciate a connective tissue, if you will, between a person and an opportunity. And so this is a great opportunity for you to take that to the next level. And there is a philosophy out there when it comes to interviewing that you want to pick yourself, right? You want to walk in the room giving that employer no other choice but to say yes to you. But if you can't effectively tell your story, if you can't effectively articulate your impact in that story, the likelihood of that happening is much, much less. So you want to walk into that room picking yourself so they have no other choice but to say yes to you, and telling your story is a great way to make sure that that happens. So as we prepare to tell a story, there's a few things I want you to ask yourself. Well, number one, what story do you want to tell? You want to have a focused, concise, impact-driven story. If you tell a story that has 8 different pieces and, kind of some branching paths and it's really difficult to follow, you're going to lose the employer. So you want to find the main focus of the story that you want to tell, stick to that, and do everything you can to accentuate that, okay? So don't tell them everything that happened since you were 8 years old, about how you got to this point, unless you can do it concisely, focused, and to a point of impact that quickly communicates to the employer your potential value as an employee, okay? So find your story. What is your story, and what story do you want to tell? What do you want them to know? Again, going back to that story, what are the highlights, the key points that you want them to know about you but most importantly, the key points that tie back into this role, right? Whether it is something in your past, something you've been able to demonstrate, a skill set, a competency, whatever it may be, how do you incorporate those into the story and what do you want them to know? Something else important to mention here is with the resume and the interview, the employers are only going to know what you tell them, right? Most likely they're not going to know you. Now, in rare situations, you may interview with someone you know previously, and in that sense, you probably have a great advantage. But in the vast majority of those interviews and those applications, they're not going to know you. And so they only know as much as you tell them, right? They only know what you communicate to them. And so that's why it's very important that we are impactful, we are concise, we are focused with our communication in the resume, but also in the interview to make sure that the story we tell resonates. And then most importantly, as I mentioned before, how do you make a connection with the company? Tell a story that connects back to the position you're applying for, right? A great story is a great story. Congratulations, you told a great story. But if you can tell a great story that ties back to the opportunity, the opening that you're applying for, that's how you get to the next level. That's how you get to the offer, okay? So tell that story in a way that circles back and comes to an end point that ties you back to the opportunity and to the company that you're interviewing with. And make sure you develop your story now so that you'll be prepared to tell your story when the time comes. Most of us are not great storytellers by nature. There are outliers for sure, but most of us need some repetition, some practice to make sure that we have the key points down, the arc, the impact easily communicated within the stories that we tell about ourselves. And so I would encourage you to practice this, to develop this, to think about this, to reflect on this, so that when the time comes in the interview for you to tell your story, you're ready to knock it out of the park, okay? Telling your story is very, very important. So one of the first places you'll get an opportunity to tell your story is in probably the most common interview question. Tell me about yourself. Most interviews will start with, hey, my name's Adam. Great to meet you, Mac. Let's kind of get things started by telling me a little bit about yourself, right? That's kind of official kickoff of the interview, if you will. And so one of the things we want you to do is prepare for that. And one of the ways that we want you to think about how you conceptualize your response to that is by using the present, past, future framework, right? So present, where are you at now? What are your current highlights? Past, going back to that story, what are some major accomplishments in your past or some things that drove you to be here today? And then future, what are your goals and aspirations? What are you looking forward to in the future? And so an example I have here is from a student's perspective here on campus at UAB. I'm gonna make myself a little bit smaller so I can read this. I apologize. That states, I am a senior at UAB, majoring in public health, and am currently working in a research lab. Before working in the lab, I volunteered at a local blood drive. My ultimate goal is to ensure equal access to basic health care for all Alabamians. Okay, so present, senior at UAB, majoring in public health, currently working in a research lab. Their major accomplishments are their past. Before working in the lab, they volunteered at a local blood drive. And then their goals and aspirations are to provide equal access to basic health care for all Alabamians, right? So in just a few sentences, they have very effectively answered that question and communicated a lot of value to that potential employer, okay? So not exact, not rocket science, but just a great way to kind of conceptualize how you answered this question, because I can almost 100% guarantee that when you go to an interview, they're going to start with this question, okay? So be prepared for that and use it as that launch pad to be able to tell your story throughout the interview. Okay, so rolling up our sleeves and thinking about kind of getting deeper into the actual interview itself. One of the more common and emerging practices in interviewing is behavioral interview questions. And what these are reflections on past behavior to predict future performance, okay? Past behavior predicts future performance. So instead of an employer saying, how would you respond to this situation? Or what would you do if you encounter someone who said this? Or how would you address this process flaw that we're trying to navigate through? Instead of asking those hypothetical future-focused questions, instead what they're going to ask is, tell me about a time you had to lead a team. How have you demonstrated your communication skills in the past? How have you demonstrated process improvement capacities in your previous roles? Those are behavioral interview questions. They look at your past behavior and give the employer some insight into how you're likely going to respond to future situations, right? So it's not just hypothetical, I feel like I would do this, or I feel like I would be able to do this. Instead, it's saying, what have you done in the past? And let me make the judgment about how comfortable I am about you doing that in the future. Got it? So behavioral interview questions are very common. They are by far the most common interview question format that we see now emerging in the interview practice. And so it's very important that we prepare for that, okay? So when we think about answering behavioral interview questions, what we recommend is utilizing the STAR method. Very similar to the APR format that we talked about with resumes, but tweaked a little bit for interviewing. The STAR method is the situation, task, action, result formula, okay? The STAR method starts with the situation. So when you get asked a behavioral interview question, what situation are you going to start out with by kind of setting the stage, right? How are you going to respond to that by setting the stage with the situation first? Then the task. So when you're thinking about your response, what task are you going to select to respond to that behavioral interview question? Then what action did you take to address that task? And most importantly, what was the result of your action, okay? Situation, task, action, result. And by doing it this way, what you're able to do very quickly and very effectively is communicate that impact that we talk about so often, okay? So situation, task, action, result. A great example of that, and probably one of the most common variations of a behavioral interview question, is this one you see here. Tell me about a mistake you've made and how you handled it, right? Like that's a doozy, right? Tell me about something that you did wrong and what happened. That's one of those interview questions that people dread, but I would certainly encourage you to prepare for it because I can almost guarantee you that it's going to be one that they ask. So here's an example of how someone responded to that. I was working as an intern for an events company, and I was responsible for ordering the floral arrangements for a private event hosted by a high-profile client, okay? So right there, situation, working at an events company, task, responsible for ordering floral arrangements for a private event. Setting the stage, right? Unfortunately, I mixed up the information from another event and the flowers were delivered to the wrong venue on the other side of town. That's bad, right? So starting out right there, kind of getting to the meat of the issue. I admitted my mistake to my boss, took an early lunch break, drove to the other venue, picked up the flowers, and delivered them to the appropriate venue an hour before the event. That's his action, right? That's what he did to kind of correct the issue that he had found himself in. The client never knew about my mix-up, and my boss was very grateful, right? So that's the result. So you can see here kind of the flow of that response, right? The situation, the company they're working for, the floral arrangements that were needed. The action, you know, they had the hiccup, so what is he going to do to make sure he rectifies it? Drove over there, nobody even knew any different. And then the result, the client never knew, and the boss is very grateful, right? And it's important to also note that you want that result to be positive, obviously. You don't want to have a response to behavioral interview question that ends on a sour note or doesn't circle back to the positive. But this is a great opportunity to kind of demonstrate how you can take a negative and kind of answer that behavioral interview question honestly, but kind of put it in the light of what you did to correct it, what you learned moving forward, and how you can navigate through those similar situations in the future. I know we're talking about flowers. I mean, I know it sounds kind of trivial, but it's a great example of how we can navigate through difficult behavioral interview questions like that using the STAR method, okay? So it's very, very important. So some other prompts to consider. Obviously, there's no limit to behavioral interview questions, and they're all very specific to the positions that you're going to be applying for. And that's where the Career Center would be more than happy to help you. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But the behavioral interview questions, we can kind of anticipate based on the job description, the company that you're interviewing with. So if we can help you out with that, please feel free to reach out to us, and I'll give you our contact information here in a little bit. But some of the real common ones that we would encourage you to consider are, tell me about a time you had to work effectively on a team. Very few occupations work in isolation, right? And so there's always some form of teamwork component, and they want to assess that in the interview. Another one, tell me about a time you had to overcome a challenging situation or task. Again, a very universal prompt, one that we would certainly encourage you to be prepared for. Describe to us how you have used problem solving to address a need at work. So again, your critical thinking skills, your problem solving skills, your analytics skills. In that prompt, they're really trying to dig deeper into that from your past to be able to predict your future, right? Your future performance on similar situations. So again, just a few to think about. I'm more than happy if you want to reach out to me. I'd be happy to share. LinkedIn actually pulled together a great resource that collects a bunch of behavioral interview questions. If you're interested in that, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll make sure you get my email address here at the end. And I'd be happy to share that with each and every one of you to kind of get your heads, kind of spinning around what these behavioral interview questions could look like in your future interviews. All right, so we've prepared for the interview. We know the company. We know ourselves. We can effectively tell our story. We can effectively respond to behavioral interview questions. We knocked it out of the park. The interview is going great. So now that we got to this point, how can we make sure that we close the interview on the right foot? Number one, ask questions based on research. Okay, so when we know the company, going back to that task I talked about at the beginning, you want to take some notes, right? You want to prepare some questions that you want to have answered by the time you get to the end of the interview. Another thing I'll note before I dig deeper into this, I think a lot of people have a misconception about, is the interview is a two-way conversation, right? I think a lot of people feel like, I'm going to the interview, I have to impress the employer or I'm not going to get this job. Certainly there's some truth to that, but at the same time, you have every right to interview the interviewer, right? And decide if it's a good fit for you. It's okay for the interviewer to offer you the job and you say, hey, appreciate the opportunity, I just don't think it's a good fit for me. I just don't feel like it's the right time. I don't think it's the good, or the right situation. But I appreciate the opportunity to interview with your company, and I hope to stay in touch with you moving forward. That is totally appropriate, right? So I want you to remember, interviews are two-way streets, and so it's very important that you have questions that you prepare to ask so that you feel good about the situation in the event that they do offer you the position. Okay, so ask questions based on research. That's number one. But another reason that that's important is because it shows to the interviewer that you've done your research about the company, right? So you've prepared a number of questions that you want to have addressed throughout the interview. And if you don't talk about it during the interview, you want to make sure that you talk about it at the end. So it could be things like, tell me about the company culture. How are you going to respond to this market threat? Or what is your growth plan for the future? What would the person who was in this role before say about this, opportunity? Those kind of questions are very appropriate and things we would encourage you to ask. But one of the worst things you can do at the end of an interview when they say, I think that's it for us. Do you have any questions for us? The worst thing you can do is say, nope, I'm good, right? They want to know that you're still engaged, that you're still interested, that you've done your research. And so asking questions is a great way to kind of fill that void, right? And to let them know you've done your research. So ask questions based on research. Number two, it sounds kind of silly, but tell them you want the job, right? So if they're interviewing a multitude of different people, it makes you stand out if you say, hey, I appreciate your time. I'm really interested in this role and I really think I can make a positive impact. So I really hope I hear from you because I would really be excited to be able to take over this opportunity. Something like that goes a long way with an interviewer, right? Because then they see that you're excited, that you're engaged, that you're enthusiastic, and that you actively want this role. And you're not just, having your resume sent out to everybody you know. Hopefully you get an interview so you can land a job just so you can get a paycheck. And an employer is not interested in someone who just wants a paycheck. They want someone who's excited about the role. So you want to make sure that you're accentuating that and highlighting that during the interview. And then finally, inquire about next steps. This is one that a lot of people fail to do that I think could save them a lot of grief. I've seen a number of people I've worked with lose a lot of sleep when they could have asked this question and had a lot of clarity. They have an interview and then a week goes by and they haven't heard anything. And then 2 weeks goes by and they haven't heard anything. But then 2 weeks and 3 days later, they get a call and they get the offer, right? And if they had asked in the interview, maybe the interviewer would have told them, don't expect to hear anything from us for 2 weeks because we got to talk to HR and we got to run this by compensation. The board needs to approve this position before we actually offer it to anybody. So if they had asked that question, they would have been fine. They would have said, all right, set my marker for 2 weeks out. I'm not going to think about it. I'm going to go on vacation with my family. I'm going to go do whatever I want to do. And hopefully in 2 weeks, I'll hear from them, right? But instead, they didn't ask that question and they lost a lot of sleep in that 2 week time frame. That's one reason. The other reason too is because they may be able to prepare you for what comes next, which means, the next step in this process is for you to meet with HR, for you to provide us with paperwork or documentation or portfolio or provide references or whatever it may be. By asking that question, you can better prepare to respond to those needs, right? And to better give yourself an advantage as you move through this process. So always inquire about next steps. It's totally an appropriate question. Don't say, did I get the job? That's not next steps. That's jumping the gun. Don't say that. That's very inappropriate. But instead, just say what's to be expected next. What does this process look like moving forward? So definitely ask that question before you close the interview, just so that you know what to expect and you have a peace of mind about the process moving forward. All right, so as I mentioned before with storytelling, practice makes perfect. Interviewing is not something that most people come to naturally, right? It's something that takes repetition. It takes practice. And there's two different ways, depending on your situation, that I want to offer an opportunity to practice. Number one, if you have a UAB email address, if you're a current student or alumni or employee or anything like that, we have through the Career Center a platform called Interview Stream that allows you to actually practice responding to interview questions using video recording. So what you do is you select prompts, you curate those prompts to what you want them to be, and then the computer asks you those questions and you video yourself responding to those. So it's a very unflinching look at how well you communicate, how well you respond to those prompts as you prepare for those interviews. So if you have that uab.edu email address, you can access this and we would strongly recommend it. However, I know a lot of you are in situations where you no longer have access to that email address. So I promise you, we still have opportunities to work with you and to support you. So the way we would encourage you to do that is to come meet with a Career Center to set up a mock interview. We would be more than happy to do it. We'll walk you through behavioral interview questions, preparing for the interview. One of the things I would encourage you to do if you do this, though, is to send us the job description for the opportunity you're interviewing for beforehand, because we want to make sure we ask questions that we anticipate the employer will ask. And it helps us a lot if we know what the position is before you come. So if you do make that appointment, please do send us the job description so we can better prepare for that appointment. But really our main goal here is building that confidence, right? We want you to feel good about that. We want you to have confidence when you walk in the room that you're going to knock it out of the park. And so those mock interviews are a great way to do that. There's no limit on how many of those you can do. So feel free to reach out to us to let us know. And we'd be more than happy to walk you through some of those mock interviews as you lead up to those interviews in your future. Okay, so we've talked about kind of the interview process. Now let's zoom out a little bit and think big picture about some considerations. And number one, what are employer expectations as you go into the interview process? Number one is timeliness. So you obviously don't want to be late to an interview. That is probably one of the biggest red flags for an interviewer is if you're late to the interview. Don't make that mistake. What we recommend in terms of timeliness is that you show up 15 minutes early if it is in person. If it is a virtual appointment, or a virtual interview on Zoom, we say 5 minutes, right? So 15 minutes in person, that accounts for parking or traffic or whatever it may be, and lets you have kind of a buffer there to make sure you're there on time. 5 minutes on Zoom, same thing, right? Technology issues, Zoom issues, whatever it may be. But there is a time where it's too early, right? You don't want to show up for an interview an hour early, sitting in the lobby, and people think, who's that weird guy in a bow tie sitting out here for an interview an hour before the time of the interview? Like, that's not a good look. Same is true for Zoom. Most people in Zoom rooms will get an email, right? When somebody hops into their Zoom room, it says, hey, Adam Roderick just entered your Zoom room. If they get that an hour before your interview, they're like, oh, what's up with this guy? Why is he showing up an hour early for his interview, right? So 5 minutes for virtual, 15 minutes for in person. Just give yourself that buffer. Give yourself that buffer in case something happens, because life happens, right? We can't predict it, so we want to make sure there's a buffer there to navigate through that. Number two, preparation. We've talked about this a lot, but they expect you to come prepared. If you come in and they can see right through you, it's not going to be a very long interview. They're going to say, thank you for your time. Maybe we'll be in touch. And that's going to be it, and that's not a good sign. So make sure they can see that you're prepared. Have those questions ready. Know the company. Know yourself. Have those rehearsed behavioral interview question responses. Let them know you're prepared. Enthusiasm, right? They want to know you're excited about this job. They want to know you're enthusiastic about this opportunity. And it's an opportunity for you to demonstrate that in the interview. You're going beyond the resume. There's no enthusiasm in a resume. It's just a resume. The interview is the point where you can show that personality, show that enthusiasm, and let them know you're really excited about this opportunity. And then finally, professional attire, okay? So I know this is probably very rudimentary to most of you, but I do want to circle back to this because I think this is very important and something that we definitely want to address. So what to wear to an interview, all right? So first and foremost, we would always encourage you to dress business professional, because it's always better to be overdressed than underdressed, right? It's better to be the overdressed person in the room than to walk into a room with people in suits and jackets and things like that, and you're in jeans and a t-shirt. You're not going to recover from that. That's a bad look, starting off on the wrong foot. So we always recommend business professional, which you see here: dark colors, solid colors, jackets, ties for the guys, shoes that are professional. Very, very conservative, right? Always default to this, and you can always dress down later, right? You can dress down for a second interview or when you get the offer and show up for first day of work, but that first impression is very important, and you want to make sure you make the right first impression. So we always encourage business professional attire for those interviews. Now, what you may find is that some organizations are business casual, right? So UAB, for example, is business casual. So you'll see here, no jackets, variants in colors, different patterns, lighter colors. Shoe choice is a lot more comfortable. No ties for guys. You see polos, things like that. If you know for a fact that the company has business casual attire, you can maybe get away with this in an interview, but I would still encourage you to go business professional and then dress down later, okay? Unless you know for sure that this is the culture and this is the expectation in the interview, I would still encourage you to default to business professional and then dress down later, okay? So again, always better to be overdressed than underdressed, so keep that in mind. And I do want to note, because this is an emerging trend, smart casual, we're seeing more and more of. A great example of this is Shipt. I don't know if y'all are familiar with Shipt or their work culture, but they bring dogs to work. They dress very casually. We have a lot of students that are employed at Shipt. This is what people at Shipt look like. They're very casual. They love what they do. They take it very seriously, but they have a very relaxed environment. A lot of people are really, really attracted to that, right? So if you're interviewing for Shipt and you know for a fact that that's their culture, you can do it. But I'm telling you, still, it's kind of a gamble, right? Because you don't know what that particular interviewer's expectations are. In that situation, if it's smart casual for everybody, I would still probably encourage business casual. Always be one step up, because you can always dress down. Now, if you show up to Shipt, a smart casual environment, and you're in a full suit, they may think, I don't know if this guy's a good fit for us. Like, he showed up in a full suit, he maybe, I don't know, culture fit may not work. So some considerations there. But in smart casual, it's kind of an emerging trend. Not everywhere. You're not going to see it at Regions or UAB or Compass or, multitude of different places. But you will see it at places like Shipt, right? So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to reach out to the Career Center. We're more than happy to help you navigate through that. But if anything that you remember from this part of the conversation, always be one step ahead, right? Always be the rung up when it comes to business attire, because you can always dress down, but it's hard to reverse those first impressions. So as we wrap things up, I want to encourage you to remember 3 things. Number 1, be genuine. Number 2, be prepared. Number 3, be confident. Number 1, be genuine, right? 2 things can happen if you fake. Like, if you fake it in an interview, only 2 outcomes can happen, and both of them are bad. Number 1, they'll see through it. They see through you are faking it, and you don't get the offer. Or 2, which is probably worse, you get the offer, you get the job faking it, and you have to fake it every single day that you show up to work. That sounds horrible. I would not wish that on anybody, right? I want you to be yourself, be genuine. Because remember, it's a 2-way conversation. You have every right to decide if it's a good fit for you, as much as they have a right to decide if you're a good fit for them. So be genuine in the interview, be authentic, and let them see who you truly are. Number 2, be prepared. I know this is probably the 4th or 5th time I've said this, but know the company, know yourself, prepare for those behavioral interview questions, get those reps in when it comes to interview practice, be prepared for these interviews. And then finally, be confident. If you've done everything we've talked about today, there's no reason you shouldn't be confident. So you should ooze that confidence when you walk in the room, right? You should be able to own the room when you walk in the room. And again, make sure that you've already picked yourself when you walk in the room. So the answer they give you can't be anything other than yes, right? So that's what we would encourage you to do. Show that confidence, be prepared so you can have that confidence and knock those interviews out of the park. So I do want to real quickly say, the Career Center is here. We would be more than happy to meet with you to prepare for your interview or your resume or job search or career exploration and so much more. A lot of people don't know this, but as current students and graduates of UAB, you have access to our services for the rest of your life, right? So we're here, whether you're current student, 5 years out, 10 years out, 25 years out, doesn't matter. We're here for you. So always feel free to reach out to us. We are more than happy to help support you. And one of the areas that we're doing a lot of support recently is in virtual career space, right? So the virtual career world has changed a lot in response to COVID. And so we want to help make sure we're adjusting with you to that. So job search strategies are very different in a virtual environment. Working remote is very different. Virtual interviewing is very different. And we also want to make sure we're working with you to build those digital shadows and to upskill to make sure that you are the top applicant for those positions that you're going to be applying for. We do have virtual walk-in hours Monday through Friday, 9 to 4 via Zoom on our website. However, I will give you a heads up that over the summer, these hours are going to shift a little bit. So I'll refer you to our website. We're going to have some updates there. But if you want to meet with us, rest assured we will be available to you. It may just mean you have to make an appointment as opposed to do a walk-in. So we'll be here for you. But again, with the summer, we're going to be shifting some of our hours a little bit. So just be on the lookout for that. This is our contact information. And I promised you about midway through that I was going to give you my contact information. So Mac, I don't know if you don't mind, can you put my email address in the chat so everybody can have it? It's really easy. It's adamrod, ADAMROD @uab.edu. And feel free to reach out to me if you want to directly. Like I said, I have a great LinkedIn resource on behavioral interview questions. If you want that, please feel free to reach out to me. Also, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn and stay in touch that way, I'd be more than happy to facilitate that. All that being said, I want you to know we're here for you. The Career Center is here for you. I'm here for you. You have a whole team of people who are eager to support you. So please make sure to engage with us and allow us to have that opportunity to be your cheerleaders as you move forward in your careers. All right, so Told you to hold me to these, so I'm going to circle back to them real quick. Takeaways from the conversation: effectively tell your story. So we talked about that. Articulate your value to employers using proven techniques to answer behavioral interview questions. And we did that primarily by utilizing the STAR method. Okay, so situation, task, action, result. Okay, so we got those knocked out. So now that we got the takeaways taken care of, I do want to offer some next steps before I open it up to questions. Number one, complete a mock interview with the Career Center, whether it's on Interview Stream if you have that uab.edu email address, or it's through the Career Center. Please do that. The more repetitions we get, the more practice we get, the better off you're going to be. And the Career Center is eager to help support you. So take advantage of what we have to offer and complete a mock interview. Complete your handshake and LinkedIn profiles. Those are very, very important pieces to make sure you get to this point in the process, right? So you won't get the interview if you're not a strong applicant. And so completing your handshake profile, completing your LinkedIn profiles are great ways to ensure that you do that and that you are attractive to employers, that you do communicate value, and ultimately that you do get those offers. And those offers come through interviews. So it's kind of that, again, resume equals an interview, interview equals an offer. So we want to kind of progress through that linear pathway. Attend a career event. There's a multitude of different career events, whether it's career fairs, employer spotlights, whatever it may be. A lot of those are in Handshake. So I would encourage you to make sure your handshake is active and make sure your handshake is complete so you can take advantage of the career events that we have within the UAB Career Center. And then again, practice your elevator pitch, practice telling your story, practice behavioral interview questions, practice the STAR method. But remember, the UAB Career Center is here to help support you as you practice for these future interviews. All right, I will open up for questions and discussions, but I do want to say thank you Thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. I very much value and appreciate these moments and want you to know that I'm here for you, and I appreciate what you're doing. Appreciate you prioritizing being here today, and I just want to say thank you. So I appreciate it. And I guess with that, I'll turn it back over to Mac.
Awesome, Adam. Fantastic job as always. Wonderful information. And we do have quite a few questions, so let's get to them. All right, the first question is, what suggestions do you have to prepare yourself for job and field specific interviews? This one was specific to epidemiology and how to prepare for something like that.
That's a great question. And I will say that every interview preparation should look different, right? So one, you want to think about things that are specific to the field. I'm not going to pretend like I know a lot about epidemiology because I do not, but I guarantee you there are some things that epidemiologists will be looking for that you're bringing to the table, right? So whether that's lab experience, publications, collaborations, whatever it may be, those are going to kind of be industry expected, right? But on top of that, another layer is, what is that particular company looking for? Are they using epidemiology to do this, or are they using it to do that? There's very difference in variances between a specific industry and what different companies do. And so you want to do research to make sure that not only are you communicating your value as an epidemiologist, but you're communicating your value as an epidemiologist to that particular company, right? So there's kind of a dual layer there. And really a lot of that comes from just industry research, company research, and then diving deep into the job description. The employer will tell you what they're looking for. Then it's up to you to fill in those gaps, right? So you have to do your research, have to be able to articulate those things and make sure that you're communicating to the employer what they're looking for.
Awesome. Okay, the next one is, what is the best way to answer the question, tell me about yourself?
Great. So circling back to what we talked about before, I would encourage you to think about that present, past, future format, right? Present, where I'm at now, I'm currently Associate Director of the UAB Career Center. Past, where I came from. So I used to actually be I am a licensed professional counselor. I owned a private practice and I worked in the academic side of campus. And then future, I'm looking for opportunities to expand my reach to support the UAB Blazer community. And I think this is going to be a great opportunity for me to do that, right? So present, past, future, being able to pull those together in kind of a concise elevator pitch, if you will, is a great way to kind of start out by telling me about yourself.
Awesome. All right. How do you effectively brag on your skill set and achievements without coming off arrogant?
That's a great question. I think there's a fine line there for sure. But I think an interview is an invitation to brag. That's the honest truth. I think, an employer wants to see that confidence, right? But there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance. One of the things I think and that would turn an interviewer off in response to that question is if everything is me, right? Everything is me. If instead of everything being me, you can articulate how you effectively contributed to a team, or how you can effectively, supported an initiative, or how you effectively made a bigger impact. Those are things that I would encourage you to think about. So it's not just, oh, I did this and I did that and I did this other thing and I completed that and I achieved this. Over time, that will start to come across as a little more boastful. So I would encourage you to kind of think about your impact in the broader sense of what you did, whether it was as a student, as an employee, or whatever it may be, a board member. To think more holistically about those impacts, right? Instead of just me, but instead that you were an active contributor to those larger initiatives.
Great. How to answer behavioral type of questions, and how to respond to a question if we're unsure about the answer or have no experience.
So going back to behavioral interview questions, I would refer back to that STAR method that we talked about. I would certainly encourage you to use that as a framework. If you don't have the experience in that particular area of what they're asking, there's kind of two routes we can take. One, we can own it and say, I haven't had that particular opportunity, but I can give you how I would anticipate my response would be in that situation. That's one. What I think is even a better response and probably more impactful is for you to find a parallel, right? Like if you can say, I didn't do that specifically, but I did do this, and let me tell you more about this thing, right? So it may not be exactly what they're asking, but you're still controlling the response by finding something to replace it, right? So if it's, tell me about your time, leading a team, maybe you can say, well, I haven't actually officially led a team, but let me tell you about how I led on this committee and what the committee accomplished under my leadership, and the communication infrastructure we established, and those kind of things. So it's not exactly what they asked, but it's a parallel to what they asked that gives you an opportunity to really highlight those skill sets and competencies.
Awesome. If I have anxiety and ADHD, how would one go about asking for accommodations during an interview, similar to the kind I already get from the UAB Disability Support Services?
That's a great question. I would not bring it up in the interview. That is, it is illegal to discriminate against someone in an interview based on any kind of disability or gender or race. Like that is federally illegal. So if they're asking those questions, that is a huge red flag, right? And so I would encourage you, be you and focus on the job, and then when you get the offer, they have to make reasonable accommodations, whether it's, access to the building or, time or whatever it may be for you. They have that is law. So they have to make those accommodations to a certain point. So I would say that's probably a conversation with HR once you get the offer. If they're asking those questions to decide if they are or are not going to hire you, that is illegal. So they can't do that. And I would encourage you not to invite the conversation by, broaching the topic. I would say focus more on your fit for the position, your skill set, and how you would be a great value to this employer.
What is the best technique I can use that will help me to stop freezing during interviews?
Practice. Practice. I think, so again, not everybody is born to speak, and not everybody is born. There's a lot of pressure that comes through interviewing, right? Like it's very high stakes. Everybody gets nervous. If it makes you feel better, everybody gets nervous. I'll be honest with you. I'll be transparent with you guys. Even before today, I do this a lot, but every single time I do these things, there's still like a little heart rate increase, before you get started with these things. That's human. That's normal. Don't feel like you're weird or wrong or anything like that. But the way you get through that is by doing it. The more you do it, the more natural it feels and the better off you're going to be at it. So repetition, repetition, repetition. It's like working out, right? You're not going to get to a squat max of 300 just because you walked in the gym one day. You got to get there over time. It's going to take repetition. It takes practice. You got to incrementally increase your exposure. So the more you do that, the better off you're going to be at it.
What should you say in an email to a recruiter?
Great question. So whenever you apply, that's a great question. So whenever you apply for a position, you always want to follow up with an email. Okay. So you want to try to find a person, not like a HR@uab.edu or anything like that, like a general email. You want to try to find the hiring manager or the HR rep or whoever it is that's responsible. May not always be able to do it, but if you can, that's the way to go. And what we want to do there is just communicate, hey, I applied for this position. I think I'd be a great fit. Basically, you want to echo your cover letter, right? And if you need help with a cover letter, let the Career Center know. So that's kind of before the interview. Now, one thing I didn't mention that I would strongly encourage is after the interview, send a thank you. Get contact information for everybody that you interviewed with, and just make sure you send them a quick email or write them a handwritten letter if you feel so inclined. That's a really impactful way to do it. And just say, I really appreciate your time. I really enjoy getting to know you. I really enjoy getting to know more about the company. and I'm really excited about this potential prospect of me making a positive impact within your organization. Like, those things make a lot of impact. And so I would strongly encourage you, when you follow up on those interviews, well, I would encourage you to follow up on those interviews and to kind of circle back to, again, make sure they know you want the job, right? So yeah, those follow-ups are important.
Great question. Do you have any specific tips or things to watch out for during internal interviews?
You mean, like, I guess they're saying red flags, maybe?
I'm betting so. I'm betting that's probably what they meant on that one.
So obviously, if it's something illegal, that's a red flag. What's going without saying, whether it's based on disability, race, sex, those kind of things, that is illegal. But if they say things about unethical behavior or anything like that, that's also a red flag. But also too, I'll tell you this: we just had someone I know who interviewed for a position at Birmingham Waterworks, and they're scared of heights, right? And so one of the things that they learned was they were going to have to be getting on water towers for part of their position, and that scared them, right? Like, so they had to make a decision real quick. So that was a red flag for them to say, I don't know if I can do that. I'm fine being on the ground, but if you want me to crawl up on the water towers, like 150 feet in the air, I don't know if that's for me. And so, kind of think about that before you walk in. Think about, like, what do you need to hear? That's one thing I would encourage you to think about. What do you need to hear from the employer to make you say yes? And then two, what are the red flags for you that if they say, oh, there's going to be weekend work, or, we kind of have flexible working hours, and most of us put in, 50 to 60 hours a week, that could be a red flag for you, right? So, those are things that I would encourage you to kind of think about beforehand so that you can kind of come in prepared. And if you hear those things, to, have your flag shooting up to say, like, make a note of that, because that may not be a good fit for me.
Is it appropriate, acceptable to bring notes with my questions and maybe some of the experiences I want to share to an in-person interview?
Yes, absolutely. Bringing in a Padfolio, I would encourage you to bring a copy of your resume, probably a couple copies of your resume, a notepad on a Padfolio. And it is okay to do that. Just be careful not to just read from it. Like, you don't want to walk into an interview and, you got your pad, and then before you know it, it's just like up in your face and nobody can see you. Like, that's not a good interview look, right? So, again, moderation there, right? So it's okay to have your notes, but don't rely on your notes, right? They're there for reference, not for repetition, and so you want to make sure that you can use them as a guidepost, but not rely on them as a crutch.
As an international student, what if I didn't hear the interview question clearly, or I can't understand what the interview question is?
That's a great question. So you have every right to say, can you repeat the question? You could even say, can you write down the question? And I would just be genuine. If English is a barrier to you, make sure they know that, but that you have prepared to overcome it in this way, right? Or you can navigate through it in this way. And if it's something that they're unwilling to accommodate, maybe that's a red flag for you, that it's not a workplace you want to find yourself in, because it's not going to be very welcoming to you. They're not the kind of people you want to work with. Again, it's a two-way street, right? You want to make sure they're comfortable with international employees. And if they're not, you don't want to work there, because that may not be a great and healthy environment for you moving forward. So asking to repeat the question, asking to write down the question, you can certainly do that during an interview.
I think you may have touched on this, but what strategies do you recommend for finding and preparing for job skill specific interview questions?
Where to gain the experience or to articulate the experience?
I'm thinking it's probably what sort of questions, if I'm interviewing for a specific job, what are the relevant questions for that role and how I should ask them?
It depends on the job description, right? So if the job description says, that one of your duties will be convening and leading a committee on, water flow utilization at Birmingham Waterworks, right? They're probably going to ask a behavioral interview question about, can you tell us about how you worked with committees before in the past, or how you led committees, right? Because that's what they're wanting with this job. So the job description kind of tells you what those questions are going to be. Not all of them, it's not perfect, but it's a great starting point. And so I would use that job description as kind of a starting launch pad, if you will, for kind of building out those questions you want to prepare for. But the Career Center is here. Like, if we can help you with that, we're more than happy to do it. Again, send us a job description and we can kind of work through it with you.
Great. Does the UAB Career Center have any attorneys on staff or individuals with any sort of legal background?
No, we do not. That is unfortunately something we can't provide. So if you're looking at, what I'm assuming you're asking is if they ask you to sign a contract or we review it. No, we don't have that kind of expertise within the UAB Career Center, unfortunately. In terms of what my recommendation would be, I mean, use your best judgment, do research on the industry. If they are asking you to sign a contract, you can probably find some best practices within that industry about employment contracts. Compare it, and make sure that it's nothing that's outrageous. Read everything. That's another thing I think a lot of people get hooked up on. They read the first sentence and they're like, oh, that sounds fine. Other 4 pages, I'm just going to ignore them, sign my initials and go with the back. Don't do that. Make sure you're reading everything that you sign. But to answer your question, no, unfortunately, we can't provide that kind of legal advice.
Great. Are there opportunities for employment outside of the state of Alabama on Handshake? What is the best way to research these?
Great question. And yes, absolutely. So there are right now 27,000 employers in the UAB Handshake ecosystem. So those are in Alabama, they're in Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, Texas, Wyoming, and they're in Mexico, Canada, India, China. Like they're all over the place. It's international career success platform. So yes, there are plenty of national and international jobs on Handshake. And the best way to explore them is just to play around. I mean, you can put keywords in, you can put industries in, you can put locations in, and kind of search in the way that you want to search through the platform. And again, we're here for that. We actually have appointments that are designed to help you navigate Handshake. So if you want to walk through that with us, we're here for that. So just send us an email, set up an appointment, and we'd be happy to do that with you.
Awesome. What are some suggestions and websites to look at when you are job searching?
Handshake. I think Handshake is where I would start. I will say this. So Handshake is, there is a tilt to Handshake that is focused on student employment, right? Our landing spots, first 5 years, first 10 years. We're expanding and it's always growing. So that's one I would start with. But if you're 20 years into the profession, another great resource I would recommend actually is LinkedIn. LinkedIn has a lot of jobs posted. So if you're looking for those centralized opportunities, those are 2 I would recommend. But really, here's the honest truth. Most of the jobs that you want to get are not going to be posted. There's something that we call the hidden job market, right? That is, more about networking, more about developing a personal brand. And we can talk about that with you if you would like. But, knowing people, looking at companies you want to work for and see what they have posted internally on their sites is a great way to get a great job. So I would encourage you to think about that as well if you're 20 years into the industry. But I would say start with Handshake, see what's available. It's always evolving, always changing, always new opportunities, and we're certainly here to help support you with that.
What are some ways that you can get an idea about the company culture? Obviously, they're putting their best foot forward. Are there any strategies to read between the lines to get a more accurate view of their culture from their answer?
That's a great question. One of the benefits of technology is there's usually a digital footprint of companies these days, right? So whether that's their website, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, those are great places to start to kind of see what are they putting out there, right? Not there for everybody. If it's a small company, I'll use my dad as an example. My dad owns a very small architectural firm with just a handful of employees. Their digital footprint is not very big. They're trying to expand it, but it's hard to kind of get a sense of culture from just their digital footprint. So that's where going into the interview, you start to ask those questions. What would someone who was in my role previously say about this role? What do people who work here say is their favorite thing about coming to work every day? What kind of things do you do for staff development? Those are questions you can ask, and to try to get a sense of what is it like to work in this organization. Is it perfect? Could they lie to you? Yeah, they could. I mean, and I think that's where, you have to trust your employer. And if you get in a situation where you can't, then maybe it's time to move on and, trying to find something that's a little bit more authentic and a better fit for you. But I would ask those questions, because you have every right to try to explore the opportunity before you commit to it. And so just be strategic with how you ask those questions in the interview.
Great. What are the biggest differences between first and second round interviews? And I guess expand on that, like what are the best ways to prepare for the different, the follow-up and the first interview? Typically,
there's kind of 2 paths that second and third order interviews will take. Number one is the first interview is kind of a screening, just we see you're a real person, congratulations, you're going to round 2. And then when you go to round 2, it's what you would normally consider like a traditional interview. That's one. The other way that we see, I'll use UAB for an example. It's a big process to interview at UAB. You have to go through like committees and things like that. And so a lot of times what that second interview is, it's kind of a repeat of the first interview, but with different people, right? So instead of meeting with the team you're working with, you're meeting with a vice president, right? Or instead of meeting with students in the initial interview, now you're meeting with the professional staff. So sometimes there'll be some crossover there, but in general, those are kind of the two pathways. Either one, you go through a screening interview and then true like interview, or you interview, you get approved and you kind of move to an elevated interview with a different population, usually a more advanced leadership population, if you will, of like a VP or an owner or a manager or something like that.
Great. We got a couple more questions and we'll end this. Okay, so this is a follow-up from a question before. Would you recommend sharing experiences with mental illness as a means of displaying your resilience and empathy for others who are struggling with similar things, or avoid the topic entirely?
That's a tricky one. Be very careful with that, because one, that's very personal, and you know, in theory, don't know these people very well. So I would be very cautious with what you share, just because that's very personal, and I don't want you to, you know, put something out there that someone's not going to respect in response, because again, you don't know these people 100% yet. It could be, to answer your question, it could be something that we could use as a leverage point, but we just want to be very careful with how we do it, right? You want to make sure that it is something that is done respectfully and something that's done strategically. So you would want to practice that, prepare it, rehearse it, so you're not just kind of winging it and sharing something that's inappropriate. But it could be, and it depends on the occupation. I'll be honest, you know, I'm a licensed professional counselor. We have a saying in the counseling field that the vast majority of us are wounded healers, right? So we've gone through something that's empowered us and you know, pushed us forward to want to help other people who are going through similar situations. So if that's the case, then yeah, it's 100% appropriate to say like, well, I got motivated to be a counselor because of these struggles I had in the past, right? But if it's other situations, it may not apply. So I think it just really depends on, you know, the positions you're applying for and kind of getting a feel for it that way.
Gotcha. And our last question to wrap everything up is, what's the best approach to discuss salary expectations? How would an entry-level applicant negotiate a fair salary?
You don't in the first interview. Don't get into salary until you get an offer, right? I would say let them make the first move, and, you know, be prepared to counter. And we do support salary negotiation in the UAB Career Center. But don't be the first one to put it out there. And you don't want to say in the first interview, that's totally inappropriate, because they may not even be thinking they want you for the job. So if you put yourself in their shoes, they're not interested in you at all, and then you ask about how much money you're going to make in this job, that's not a good look. So wait for them to do it and then be able to counter. And then we can talk about it later, but you know, you want to know what going rate is, what the industry average is. You want to know what unique skill sets and abilities you provide above and beyond the job description. There's things like that we can talk about, but wait and let them do that first.
Great. Well, Adam, well, thank you so much for joining us. Again, fantastic information. And as always, as everybody knows, and we've said before, there will be a recording of this, and you have Adam's contact information, and ours as well will be here in just a minute. So if you have any other questions or any things you want to go over with the UAB Career Center, please reach out to them. So Adam, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
All right. Next up, we have our podcast. So if you guys are looking for a podcast to listen to during your day and to and from work, I want you to check out the UAB Grand Told. Our podcast features members of the UAB community and is released every other week. You can find it on Spotify or Apple Podcast, or visit alumni.uab.edu/greenandtold. You can also stay up to date on everything alumni on social media. Just search UAB Alumni on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. On LinkedIn, search UAB Alumni Career Community. Need to get a hold of us? Email alumni.uab@uab.edu. All right, and once again, thank you so much for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn with Adam Roderick. Have a great afternoon, and as always, go Blazers.